St. Matthew chapter 11, verses 25 to chapter 12, verses 8. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. He answered, Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple discreet the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Barak more.
Hi, Angel.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I was reading the Bible the other day, and I was just wondering, who was Matthew at the time of Jesus?
Well, Matthew was a tax collector. He was also one of the evangelists. Matthew was the most Jewish out of the gospel writers. He also sought out to tell the story of Jesus Christ to a distinctly Jewish audience. But what do you think the Jews thought of Jesus?
Well, in Matthew's Gospel, it's written that Israel's Messiah, Jesus, comes to his people, the Jews, but is rejected by them, and how after his resurrection, he sends the disciples to the Gentiles instead. And Jesus was a teacher even greater than Moses. He healed people who couldn't walk, he healed the blind, he cured a man of leprosy. So Matthew's purpose in writing the Gospel is to convince that Jesus is the promised Messiah of God. Now, in the Old Testament, in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5, it says, He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. So I find it quite silly that the Jews kept rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. As to me, and I hope for you as well, the Old Testament Messiah is the direct embodiment of Jesus Christ. Now, one of the chapters I found really tricky was chapter 11. What did that mean to you?
Well, in chapter 11, Jesus answers a few questions from John the Baptist's followers. He upholds John's ministry. John condemns several cities in Galilee for rejecting his teachings despite obvious signs. He also thanks his Father for hiding the truth from those who arrogantly think they are wise. But where does he mention this?
Well, in chapter 11, verse 25, it says, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. But what are these things? It's a little bit vague.
Well, these things, in the case of what Jesus had been talking about, they are things that should be obvious. If Jesus displays power that can only come from God, power to raise the dead and heal impossible illnesses and cast out demons with a word, then he must be the Messiah. Why would nobody believe that? So in a way, Angel, I do agree with you. The Jews are silly for rejecting the Messiah, but why do you think they use little children?
Well, little children are innocent and impressionable. They completely depend on other people and they're not wise in their own eyes. But in contrast to this, the wise and learned, they walk and talk as if they hold the most power. And when praying, they pray to show off their faith. Now, earlier in Matthew, Jesus was saying that when you pray, a prayer should be between you and God. You shouldn't be praying to try and show everyone else that you have a connection with God. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now that we've gone over the basics of chapter 11, what did you get from chapter 12?
Well, in chapter 12, Matthew records Jesus' confrontations with the Pharisees over Sabbath issues, and it heats up so much so that Jesus ends up getting compared to the devil and his miracles to the power of the devil. Where does it mention the Sabbath in Matthew?
Well, it mentions the Sabbath in Matthew chapter 12, verses 8. For the Son of Man is Lord, even on the Sabbath day. But what is the Sabbath?
Well, first, I think it's important we point out that Matthew wanted us to know that this happened on the Sabbath. This is important because the Sabbath is the fourth commandment. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It's a day of rest, and it was commanded by God and handed down through Moses. Out of all the Jewish practices, the weekly observance of the Sabbath was the most familiar, the most distinctive, because it occurred weekly, and whether you were rich or poor, all classes of Jews followed the Sabbath. So now that you know what the Sabbath is, what do you think this verse means?
Well, in this chapter, Jesus went through a grain field on the Sabbath with his disciples, and as they went along, his disciples became hungry. Naturally, they decided to pick the heads of the grain and eat them. But when the Pharisees saw that his disciples were doing this, they accused Jesus. This shows that the Pharisees were tracking Jesus, following along with him, even as Jesus' disciples followed. They said to him, look at your disciples do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. It appears from the tone of the interchange that follows that the Pharisees' purpose in following Jesus was not to learn from him and his ways. Rather, it seems the Pharisees adopted a goal to undermine Jesus and his teachings.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, especially because at that time, everyone in power, religious leaders, political leaders, none of them liked Jesus. So all they were trying to do was attack his credibility. And because Jesus' disciples violated the Sabbath, they blamed Jesus because they were his disciples. So they made it seem like Jesus was either a fraud or a shabby rabbi. And because, like I said before, the Sabbath was a vital issue to them, they were also offended by him. But they weren't offended that Jesus' disciples broke God's law on the Sabbath because they hadn't. The Pharisees were offended because Jesus' disciples violated their laws concerning the Sabbath. So, beneath what the Bible's actually saying, the Pharisees' offense was dangerously mistaken for the fact that their rules were God's laws. So, Pharisees had been blasphemous, they had put themselves in the place of God. Now, can I ask you a question before we move on?
Yeah.
Do you know what season we are in the church?
Well, we're in Lent.
And normally for Lent, people give up something. As Orthodox Christians, we fast for meat, fish, egg. Are you doing that this year?
Yeah, I am.
And so let's say you're in a situation where the only thing you could eat was chicken nuggets or hamburgers. What would you do?
Well, I would eat them, but I
Right.
wouldn't eat them actually.
Oh, how come? So you'd rather die out than break your fast the one time?
Well, when you put it like that, I probably would eat them.
This is because God gave the Old Testament, the Jews, a set of rules, the 10 Commandments, but Jesus came and he made them more humane. He said, instead of do not kill, do not even be angry at the people you're with. And Jesus came up with this one golden rule, love thy neighbor. Now, if we love thy neighbor, we won't steal, we won't be jealous. Everything comes under that. But sometimes the most loving thing a person can do for us or for other people is to break some of these rules. In their time, the disciples preached all day. They walked from place to place, preaching Jesus' message, preaching God's message. And they got hungry and they ate on the Sabbath. That isn't such a law that can't be broken. They broke it for themselves. And like you said, if you're in a situation where you were dying out, you'd eat, because Lent isn't just based on food alone. If you're not eating meat and not eating fish, egg, anything like that, but you're sinning other sins like lying to lying to everyone you love, you're not being a good Christian just because you're not eating. Like, Lent isn't fasting alone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But how can we use Matthew's other verses in our daily lives?
Well, another one we can use is no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal himself. Now, this message was given to us directly from Jesus, like in John, the truth, the way, and the life. So we should all allow Jesus and the Lord to be revealed to us, and we can do this by praying or attending Kubana. And this way, when we take in the body and blood of Christ, we are cleansing our bodies, the temples of God, and letting God come into our lives.
The Son revealed himself to us through his resurrection, through defeating death. The world is distracting and hateful. When we are lost and finding a purpose in materialism and self-ambition, find the Father who is revealing himself to us. Instead, live for him.
And another verse we can use is, "Come to me, all of you who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest." Now, these heavy loads aren't quite literally bricks on your back. These heavy loads are metaphorical for the burdens, the worries that we carry emotionally. Jesus is saying to surrender your pain, your sadness, your suffering, because Jesus took away our suffering. That's why he died on the cross, to take away our sins and our suffering. So if Jesus gave up his life for you, only he can give you peace. So Matthew is trying to say that motivational speakers, therapy, support groups, none of them are going to give you true strength or true peace, because only the Lord who loves you, knows you, chooses you, made you in his image, can give you strength. I hope chapter 11 and chapter 12 of Matthew, tricky chapters, are a little bit clearer for you today. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.